The topic I want to talk about this week is Matzah Ashira, which I guess in English could be enriched matzah, and the most common type that we probably have is egg matzah. It's very different. Truth is, meaning just to spoil a bit at the end, this too ends up being a distinction between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, where Ashkenazim are generally strict on the matter and don't eat Matzah Ashira on Pesach, whereas Sephardim are lenient and do eat Matzah Ashira on Pesach. But it's a very different than Kitniyot when it comes to Kitniyot. When it came to Kitniyot, we said that all started as a minhag, as a custom, which is first recorded in about the 13th century. Now, what they say, it was already they didn't say it wasn't instituted in the 13th century. They recorded it in the 13th century as a custom that they already had, but it was relatively new. And the reason we had the distinction between Ashkenazim and Sephardim when it came to Kiniyot depended on the custom of the because in the Ashkenazi communities they had the custom not to eat it, and in the Sephardic communities they had the custom to eat it. Matzah Ashira, eating Matzah Ashira, again we'll call egg matzah, whatever you want to call it, is very different because this very much is sourced in the Gemara itself, and we'll see here. The first two sources will read two Gemaras which are going to seemingly contradict each other, and then the resolution of those two Gemaras is ultimately going to end up leading to the different customs that we have with respect to Matzah Ashira.
You sang happy birthday and you won.
Oh, happy birthday. Wow, very... Okay.
Are there candles in the...
Candles, there's streamers and there are funny hats.
So let's begin with just reading reading through the first two Gemaras. So both Gemaras are Pesachim, close to each other. The first Gemara in Pesachim, Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, reads as follows. Source number 1. Amar Rabbi bar Barchan Amar Reish Lakish. Isa shenilosha biyain v'shemen udvash. If you have dough that is kneaded with either wine or with oil or with honey, ein chayavin al chimusa kares. You do not violate the biblical prohibition. You don't receive kares. If you eat chametz on Pesach, you receive that punishment. But if the dough is kneaded with these liquids, then you are not chayav kares on eating that bread ultimately. So then the Gemara continues. Yasiv Rav Papa Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua Kamed Rav Idi Bar Avin. So they're sitting in front of Rav Idi Bar Avin. V'Yasiv Rav Idi Bar Avin Bekan Menamnem, and then Rav Idi Bar Avin, Rav Idi Bar Avin was sitting there also. The Amar Le Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua Rav Papa. Okay, ultimately we get to here. Rav Huna says, the son of Rav Yoshua says to Rav Papa, my time at Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish again just said that if you have the dough that's not prepared with water and flour, but is with oil and flour or wine and flour, etc. So again, you're not chayav kares. So why not? My time at the Reish Lakish. Amar Le, he responds to him. De Amar Kra. Lo sochal alav chametz. The pasuk says, and the truth is they should have quoted the whole pasuk here. The beginning of the pasuk is Lo sochal alav chametz, which means you shouldn't eat chametz. And then the continuation of it is Shivas Yamim Matzos. The continuation of the pasuk is for 7 days you should eat matzah. So the beginning of the pasuk says don't eat chametz. The continuation of the pasuk says you should eat matzah. So what do we learn from there? Dvarim she'adam yotzei bahen yedei chovaso b'matzah chayavin al chimutzo kares. Only for matzah with which you can fulfill your obligation on the Seder night, if that type of bread becomes chametz, then you are going to receive kares. Veha hoil ve'ein adam yotzei ba yedei chovaso dahavya le matzah ashira. But when it comes to matzah ashira, again mixing the flour with oil or water, oil or wine or honey, then it has the status of matzah ashira. Everybody agrees now when it comes to the Seder night, you're not allowed to eat matzah ashira to fulfill the mitzvah. Why not? Because the Torah says lechem oni. Lechem oni, we say, means poor man's bread. So poor man's bread is water and flour. Once you start mixing in fancier ingredients, wine, honey, etc., that becomes matzah ashira. That becomes enriched bread, and you can't fulfill everybody agrees you can't fulfill the mitzvah Seder night. So if you can't fulfill the mitzvah of the Seder night, therefore the Gemara wants to say, you know what else? Since you can't fulfill the mitzvah on the Seder night, that also does not become chametz, because since the pasuk links chametz with the mitzvah of eating matzah, so only something with which you could have potentially fulfilled the obligation of eating matzah will you be in violation of the isser, the prohibition of eating chametz. So that is what the Gemara wants to suggest initially. But then that's not so simple. And the reason is the Gemara now is going to reject that. So if you look the third last line on source number 1, second word. Itbe Rav Huna B'reid Rav Yoshua Rav Papa. If you think that's true, based on the principles, how about the following case? Himchehu v'gamu. You take your chametz, so you take your food, you heat it up, and then you essentially just pour it down. You heat it up, and then you pour it down your throat. You don't chew it at all. It just you just swallow it straight. So im chametzu, if you do that to chametz, if you take chametz, heat it up, and then pour it down your throat, and don't chew it at all, anosh kares. So you receive kares. The imatzahu, but if it's matzah, if you do that to your matzah on the Seder night, ein adam yotzei yidei chavasa b'Pesach, you don't fulfill your obligation of eating matzah on the Seder night. And therefore it's v'hahacha de'ein adam yotzei yidei chavasa b'matzah v'chayavin al chimuso kares. We have a situation where you're going to fulfill with which you can't fulfill your obligation for eating matzah, but you can violate the prohibition of chametz. So the situation, the initial suggestion of the Gemara cannot be true. It can't be that any time you eat in a method with which you're going to, because what the Gemara here in the beginning was suggesting, if you eat it in a method almost with which you're going to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, then you can get kares. If you're not fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, you're not going to get kares. We say, well, that you can't make that distinction to that extent. So now that's rejected. So what is the reason again? Let's go back. The reason again, but we still are maintaining that if you mix the dough, the flour with yain, shemen, and dvash, other types of liquid, you don't get kares. So why not? So here the Gemara concludes, Idar behu Rav Idi bar Abin Amrle Udardiki, says, children, Hainu time at the Rish Lakish. Why? Mishum dahabile mei peros. Because everything that you mentioned in that list before is mei peros. You can say is fruit juice or something of the like. Umei peros in machmitzin. The principle that we hold is that fruit juice does not create chametz. So that is the conclusion. So again, you can almost skip over everything in the middle just to see the conclusion. The beginning was, again, if you knead the flour with using wine, honey, or oil, you don't get kares, and the reason is, we conclude, is because, why? Because those do not produce chametz. Umei peros, last 4 lines, in machmitzin. They don't produce chametz. Since they don't produce chametz, you're not going to get kares for that, for eating that type of bread on Pesach.
No question. Are they cooking this within 18 minutes or no relation to that at all?
Okay, so we're going to get there in a second. We're going to get there in a second in terms of now reconciling that with the next Gemara, potentially. But based on this, the assumption, well, depends how now you're going to read it. The last 4 lines, Umei peros ein machmitzin, implies...
Doesn't matter.
It implies that never. You would think it means never, meaning that even if it sits together, and they're going to be phrases, afilu, they sit together for a full day, they're not going to become chametz.
Okay, the argument against it was a stretch, as far as I'm concerned, about the swallowing it.
Forget that. That was all.
Let me ask you this question. Matzah, we make a moitzi.
Yeah.
But wheat, just during the year. But flour and wheat, we make a moitzi. But juice and wheat, we do not.
Okay.
During the rest of the year. So shouldn't that be the argument, that you can't make a moitzi on that stuff? So that's why you don't get kares.
No, because you don't only get kares for making kamoti, you get kares for eating cookies. That you also make. That's also mizonos. You'd get kares for that.
No, you're missing what I'm saying. That the argument, his argument that you don't get kares because you're not eating
chametz,
which is water and...
Chametz is water and flour, and this is not water and flour.
Correct.
Yeah.
But shouldn't that be the argument of why the matzah shira is not, why we don't use it, therefore it can't be chametz.
I think okay, because there are two issues I think with matzah shira. Perhaps issue number one is, can you eat matzah shira? There's only mitzvah to eat matzah one night. Okay, chutz la'aretz we have 2 nights. The first 2 nights of the seder is the only time in all Pesach where there's a mitzvah to eat matzah. The rest of the chag, the overwhelming majority of opinions is that there's no mitzvah to eat matzah. If you want to eat something, then you can eat matzah because that's what you have. But there's no special mitzvah to eat matzah. When it comes to that, everybody agrees you cannot use matzah ashir to fulfill the mitzvah on the Seder night because it needs to be lechem oni. It needs to be what we'll call poor man's bread. This is matzah ashira. This is enriched bread. That's issue number one. Issue number two is, forget the first night. How about the rest of Pesach? What is the status of all these? What is the status of flour mixed together with these fruit juices? Can it become chametz or can it not become chametz? So you're trying to say, I think if I understand you correctly, you want to say the fact that since we're using fruit juice, then it will be mizonos. That's the reason why you can't fulfill the mitzvah the Seder night. The problem, that is not.
I understand, but within
that is not. That isn't true. I would say that isn't true. Only for one reason. I think because whenever you make a meal out of something, like, for example, if you make a meal out of crackers, you would make hamotzi on it. And if you eat it, yes. So if you ever make a meal out of what the category you're talking about is pat haba b'kisnin. So if you ever make a meal out of that, you would actually make hamotzi. So I don't think that'd be the reason. The reason is lechem oni versus matzah ashira. Based on Gemara number one, my assumption would be that you can never become chametz, meaning if you mix your flour and your oil, and it sits together for a full day, and then you come back and bake it, you're okay, you're good to go. Let's look at source number 2, because here's where it gets confusing. Gemara Psachim, the continuation. Here the Gemara writes as follows. B'sava Rabbi Akiva isa shenilosha b'yayin b'shemen udvash lo. Do you want to tell me that according to, this is coming in the middle, but you want to tell me that according to Rabbi Akiva, if you need dough with yayin, shemen, and dvash, you don't fulfill, I think, the mitzvah of matzah? V'hatanya. But we have the following teaching, the following brisa. Ein lashin isa b'pesach b'yayin v'shemen udvash. The brisa says you do not need flour on Pesach together with oil, oil, wine, and honey. V'im lash, and let's say you did do this, you're not supposed to, let's say you put them together. Rabban Gamliel omer tisarek miyat. Rabban Gamliel says burn it right away. The Chachamim omrim yochal. The Chachamim say you can eat it. V'yamar Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says Shabbasi haisa etzel Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yoshua. I once spent a Pesach with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yoshua. V'lashti lahem isa b'yayin v'shem nudvash. And I took flour and I kneaded it together and I baked something with it after mixing it with oil or honey. V'lo amri li davar. So there are 3 opinions in this brayta here. Rabbi Akiva says you can absolutely mix them together. Seems to be one opinion. But Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi and the Chachamim both say you cannot take these. You cannot take these what we'll call fruit juices and mix them together with flour. And if you do, then the question is, what should you do? So Rabban Gamliel says you should burn it because we're concerned. The concern is, according to Rabban Gamliel, that it's become chametz quicker than regular water, and therefore we don't trust you to guard it, and therefore you should burn it. Chachamim say, well, you shouldn't have done it in the first place, but if you did it and made sure to ensure that it doesn't become chametz, then you can go ahead and eat it. So what's the assumption here based on Chachamim? All of a sudden, the conclusion of the previous Gemara implied it can never become chametz. All of a sudden here, the Chachamim are concerned, well, it can become chametz, and you shouldn't do it lechatchila. Now, if you've done it already and you made sure to take all the precautions, then you can eat it. But we're telling you shouldn't have done that in the first place. It seems to be a contradiction. Now, it happens to be, just for this sake, there's another problem, because the Gemara here, this is just a Rabbi Akiva problem. The Gemara here started off that according to Rabbi Akiva that you couldn't use matzah the first night. That seemingly implied that you couldn't mix it in these with yain, shemen, and dvash. And then we have the story of Rabbi Akiva where they do mix it with yain, shemen, with dvash. So even within Rabbi Akiva there's a contradiction, and the Gemara's conclusion is no, there's no contradiction. Because when does Rabbi Akiva say you can't use the fruit juices for the Seder night? Because again, matzah shira, you can't use the Seder night. When Rabbi Akiva says you can use it, that's the rest of the Chag. But let's leave Rabbi Akiva's side. According to Chachamim, now we have a problem. End of source number 1, the implication was it can never become chametz. Well, mei peros ein machmitzin. The implication for source number 2 is, well, you shouldn't be doing this. Well, if it doesn't become chametz, then why shouldn't you be doing this? So there's going to be 2 ways to resolve this contradiction, and the 2 ways to resolve this contradiction are ultimately going to be the reason for the custom of the distinction between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. Even though the 2 answers we're going to see are both within the Ashkenaz world. It's going to be an argument between Rashi and Tosfos. So Rashi offers offers one explanation. How do you reconcile the 2 Gemaras? So if you look in Rashi source number 3, Ein Lashi Nesaisa, again that's referring to not kneading with these Yain Shem and Dvash. Shel Matzos, the Yain Shem and Dvash. Why? Why shouldn't you be kneading with this? Mipnei Shekrova Umimaheres Lahachmitz. Because actually if you start using these fruit juices, it becomes chametz quicker than water. Ve'ein adam yachol l'shomra, and it's very difficult to guard it, to prevent it from becoming chametz. Lefichach, therefore, im lash, therefore, if you burn it, if you already knead them together, tisaref miyad, that's going to Rabbi Gamliel. Uvemoed kamar v'lo b'yom tov, and they just say as a parenthetical point, according to Rabbi Gamliel, says you should burn it. That's only on chol hamoed, not actually on Yom Tov. Dehavar shelo torachi, because then you're burning something without a purpose, and you can only use fires which have a purpose on Yom Tov. That's why we can cook, but you can't just burn things for the sake of it. In the brackets, it's Rabbi Yochanan, who's really Reish Lakish. Now he's going to raise our issue. Reish Lakish de Amar La'el me peros ein machmitzin. I don't understand. According to Reish Lakish before, it can never become chametz. So what's the concern over here that it becomes chametz more quickly? Lo kashya. That's not a problem. Why? Hachti'ihu ein chayavin al chimutzo kares ka'amar. Because when the conclusion of source number 1 said umei peros ein machmitzin, that only meant that it doesn't become chametz to the extent for which you're going to receive the punishment of kares. Below have a chavetz gamor. It doesn't become what we'll call full-fledged chametz. Ella chametz nuksha havi. It is chametz nuksha. What is chametz nuksha? Kolomar ra. It ends up becoming a bad type of chametz. Chametz nuksha is just it's when it does become chametz, but it's not really. It's almost spoiled. So that's chametz nuksha. It's almost bad chametz. Ve'oso chimut hein memarin lahachmitz v'yefshar l'shomra. So how does he reconcile the 2 Gemaras? He says, what's the concern? The concern is when you mix it together with these fruit juices, it's going to become chametz even quicker. If it's going to become chametz even quicker, how do we explain source number 1? We explain source number 1 because when it says ein machmitzin, it doesn't mean it doesn't become chametz. It means it doesn't become real chametz. But it does become chametz nuksha.
A little pregnant.
Exactly. and what happens is that chametz nuksha, you don't violate the prohibition of kares. It's just I think we'll call it Isser Lav. So it doesn't reach that higher level. Now, the truth be told, that's not such a stretch, because even though the last 4 words of the Gemara were Beit Peros ein machmitzin, the first line in source number 1, Reish Lakish's initial statement was, if you mix this flour with these fruit juices, ein chayavin al chimutzo kares. So it's not such a stretch to say at the end, when it says Umei Peros ein machmitzin, that's only referring to his initial statement. It doesn't become chametz to the status of a kares, but it still is going to become chametz. So that is one way to reconcile the 2 Gemaras. That is the opinion of Rashi. Tosfos takes another approach. If you look at source number 4, with the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, who is Rashi's grandson. Source number 4, mei peros ein machmitzin, b'chein pirish Rabbeinu Tam, de ein machmitzin kolikar. No, when it says ein machmitzin, it doesn't mean, don't start adding in words, ein machmitzin, when it says ein machmitzin only to the level of kares. No, when it says it doesn't become chametz, it means it does not become chametz. So now, if that's true, then how is he going to explain the second Gemara? If you take that literally, then you have to explain something for the second Gemara, then why are you so concerned about kneading them together? According to those opinions there, Kishe'irev imahem mayin. The whole case, the whole scenario in source number 2 is when it's not only fruit juice and flour, it's fruit juice, water, and flour. De'az b'maros yoser lahachmi. It's because when it's fruit juice, water, and flour, then it becomes chametz more quickly. Ve'alaha amar de'ein bahen kares. And in that case, you're not going to receive kares, aval lav ispe, but you are going to receive, but it is going to be a prohibition nevertheless. Aval heicha delays beit haroves mayim, but in a situation where there is no water mixed in whatsoever, kigon yain v'chometz ushar meperos sharu legamre. According to Rabbeinu Tam, if you take oil or you take wine and you mix it together with the flour and you make bread from that mixture, it cannot become chametz. Impossible. The only concern we have is if you mix some water into that whole thing. So you don't mix in any water, there is no concern whatsoever. He actually continues now, and this is what we'll get to. He just starts the discussion. Until now, we've only mentioned 3 liquids, if you've noticed. Well, the case is always mentioned yain, shemen, and dvash. The problem is the last line was then we seem to expand that to this category of may peros, which seems to imply all fruit juices. And then the second Gemara, I skipped the end of it, then it also talks about using milk. So then a secondary question, which we'll get to soon, is what is included in these quote-unquote fruit juices? Is it everything? Is it just yain, shemen, and dvash? So here, Rashi had a safek. He just quotes, "May peitim nistapik Rashi." Rashi had a safek. Ichashi may peros olo. He wasn't sure what the status of eggs were, if they had the status of may peros or not. Lefi she'anu roim she'isa nasa bahen avayoser mibamayim. Because I guess he might have thought it might be the same as water, but then it becomes even thicker than water. He wasn't sure what the status of eggs were. But then, Avar Rabbeinu Tam, Nahag Heter Bedavar. Rabbeinu Tam was lenient. He ate Matzah Ashira on Pesach, again, because he thinks it doesn't become chametz. So as long as your whole mixture is flour and a fruit juice, it doesn't become chametz, so you can eat it on Pesach. We'll leave the last part of Tosfos for later. So we have these 2 ways to explain the Gemara. According to Rashi, fruit juice and flour does become chametz, just not full chametz, what we'll call chametz nuksha. According to Rabbeinu Tam, flour and fruit juice can never become chametz. Only if some water is mixed in does it become chametz. So how does this play out in terms of the halacha? So if you look in source number 5 in the Rambam, he writes, Chameshes mine dagan elu, if you have the 5 grains, im lashan b'mei peros bilvad, if you knead them together with only fruit juice, and he says mei peros, implying all fruit juice, below shum mayim, without any water mixed in, la'olam ein bayim lidei chimutz, it can never become a chametz, afilu hinichan kol hayom, ad shenitpach habatzek mutar ba'achila. Even if you let them sit together all day, and I think they end up rising, it does not become chametz. She'ein mei peros machmitzin ela masrichin. We had this last week as well. Because mei peros do not create chametz, they are masriach, they spoil them. We said the same thing with kitnios. That's why kitnios aren't chametz, because when you mix water with kitnios, they don't become chametz, masrichin. So we're using that same, even though the Gemara didn't use that phrase, the Rambam maybe is even borrowing it from there and applying that here as well. Fruit juice and flour is not going to become chametz. And now what's included in mei peros? Umei peros hein, kigon, yain, chalav, udvash, v'shemen, zayis, umei tapuchim, apple juice, umei rimonim, bechol, kayotzi, behen mishar yenos, ushnami numashkin. He seems to imply all types of fruit juice are going to be included in this prohibition. Again, vehu shaloi isari behem shum mayim ba'olam, but that's only implying if you don't mix in any other water. But if you do, if you mix in water, then it does become chametz. So who does the Rambam hold like?
Yes, Tosfot.
Exactly. He's holding like Rabbeinu Tam. He's holding like exactly.
Tam is an Ashkenaz.
He is. Yeah, yes, correct. He is Ashkenaz. The Rambam, who's Sfard, but adopts that same approach, that same understanding, and he says if it's just fruit juice and flour, it cannot become chametz. The Ravid here, who often argues on the Rambam, argues, and if he argues, whose approach does he take? He takes. I'm not going to read inside. He takes Rashi's approach, which is it can become chametz. So don't just get not to that higher level of chametz. And again, if you look in source number 6, here we see in terms of Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, how do they hold? So if you look here, I have the discussion of this comes up in Siman Taf Samech Beis. So here I just have a few seifim from that Siman. For example, the Shulchan Aruch starts off in Seif Aleph. Source number 6, Mei Peros Belomaim Ein Machmitzin Klal, can never become Chametz. Umuter Lechol B'Pesach Matzah Shelinosha B'Mei Peros, Afilu Shasa Kol Hayom. And it's permitted to eat matzah that was kneaded together with fruit juice, even if they sat together for a full day. Aval Ein Yotzei Ba Yidei Chovaso. However, he notes here, this is what everybody agrees, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah the first night eating this type of matzah. Mipnei Shei Matzah Ashira, B'Kraksi B'Lechem Oni. So that everybody agrees. So again, whose approach is Shulchan Aruch taking? The Rambam, which is Rashi. Rashi, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, all say it cannot become, Rabbeinu Tam, Rambam, and Shulchan Aruch all say it cannot become chametz. Mix it together, you can eat it, no issue.
Can I leave now?
You can leave. Source number, in Sif Beis here, he just mentions if you mix in water, then you have a problem. And then in Sif Dalid, so Mei Beitim Ushar Mashkim Kulam Havi B'Chal Mei Peiros. So here already the Shulchan Aruch adds in eggs. That eggs is the same as Mei Peiros, implying that it cannot become chametz. And here is where Mark wants to close his ears. Uvim Dinos Elu. Here you have the Ramah, the bottom of the Ramah here in the italicized words. Uvim Dinos Elu Ein Nohagim Lalush B'Mei Peiros. Our minhag has become not to knead flour with mei peiros, v'afilu liktof hamatzos enohagin rak la'achar fiyasan ba'otan chamin, and even to like sprinkle it on after you knead it together, you should only do that after it's already cooked. Ve'en l'shanos, and do not deviate from this practice. Imlo b'shasat chak, again, unless there is very similar to kidneys, unless there is a dire situation. Litzarche chola, again, if you have somebody who's ill and matzah can't eat matzah, but will be able to eat this Matzah Shira, Ozake, Natsari Chazeh, or if somebody elderly requires it as well, we're going to be lenient. Now the question is, why is the Ramah, what is the reason that Ashkenazim says the practice is not to mix them together?
The question is, why does he say that though?
Well, he says obviously because that was the practice. Meaning he's saying, the practice was we do not mix them together. Now the question is, why? Why does he say that? I mean, Shulchan Aruch says it doesn't become chametz. If it doesn't become chametz, what's the issue? It doesn't become chametz, but all of a sudden here, the Ramah is saying, well, don't do it. So there
Ramah lived when?
Sorry?
What century did the Ramah live?
The Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch are both in the 16th century.
Is it just because they just didn't do it, as opposed to...
I don't think so, because then you wouldn't say that we have a minhag not to do it. And then you would just say, you wouldn't say anything. Okay. If you have a minhag not to do it, I think that means you have the option to do it, then because the Sephardim were doing it and they weren't. So the question is, why weren't they doing it? So there are three reasons we can give. One is maybe we are concerned for the opinion of Rashi. So again, before we said Rabbeinu Tam is the one who says it doesn't become chametz, but Rashi says it does become chametz. So perhaps we're concerned for the opinion of Rashi, and it can become chametz, and therefore we're not doing it. That's reason one. Reason number two, and therefore again you wouldn't be able to make anything from it because we're concerned that it becomes chametz even more quickly, and we can't guard it, and etc. That's reason one. Reason number two, perhaps, is maybe we don't believe it can become chametz if it's on its own, but maybe we're concerned that some water is going to be mixed in, which even the Shulchan Aruch agrees then it can become chametz.
And this has to be water during the process as opposed to water after.
Yes, then water after is the kabraksis. That's kabraksis. That's not for us.
No.
And the third reason, which is not brought here, which is not brought, I didn't bring here, but some of the Rishonim bring, is you know why the minhag became not to use it? Because since you can't fulfill the mitzvah, we talked about this last week with Kenya, since you can't fulfill the mitzvah the first night with matzah shira, everybody agrees you can't fulfill the mitzvah with matzah shira. We're concerned that you're going to, we're concerned once you start baking matzah shira, even if your intention is only to use it for the last 6 days, you're going to end up using it the first night. And since you're not going to fulfill your mitzvah the first night, better not to make matzah shira all together. This same argument we mentioned last week was used where can you make matzah from flour made out of kitnius, and we brought that svara. It also comes up, I've seen it come up, with respect to machine matzah. That one of the arguments against machine matzah is that you can't make it lishma. When you make matzah for the Seder night, you have to have intention of fulfilling the mitzvah with it. And because it's a machine doing it, then you're lacking in the element of lishma. So one of the arguments is, since you can't use it for the Seder night, you shouldn't use it all of Pesach, because once you use it for the rest of Pesach, you're going to come to use it Seder night. So this argument comes up in many different forms, and that is, whenever you can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah Seder night, we're telling you almost don't make matzah altogether, because we're concerned you're going to start.
Now, the people that will eat only handmade shmur matzah throughout all of Pesach, is it because A, machine, and B, because of the shmur matzah itself that's guarded, or is it?
No, it's probably other. You have to come. I'm going to speak about it on the first days of Pesach here. If you're going to be initial.
You can still get machine-made shmur matzah.
I'll be.
You can still get machine-made shmur.
No, I understand, but I'm just asking if somebody that just holds, if they eat shmur matzah, would they eat machine-made shmur matzah? Because they're more.
Some of them yes, some of them no. It depends why they're not eating machine matzah in the first place.
That's
So there are different reasons. So some yes and some no. Here in source number 7, I just brought the Mishnah Berurah, which I didn't bring on the sheet, apparently adopts that the reason why we're concerned for chametz for matzah shira is because A, maybe we're concerned for the opinion of Rashi that it can become chametz, and B, maybe we're concerned that there's water that falls in, which is then funny, because then what ends up happening is that if we believe that, then there's really a concern of chametz with matzah ashira. But if there's really concern, then perhaps you would think, well, that means you shouldn't own it, and that means you can't benefit from it like actual chametz. But I've never seen anybody who says you can't own matzah shira. And the truth of the matter is, the Ramah himself says again, b'shas adchak, in a dire situations, you can eat the Torah for a chola or a zaken can eat it. Nobody says b'shas adchak you can eat chametz. Again, pikuach nefesh, yes. B'shas adchak isn't pikuach nefesh. Even though that might be the reason behind the minhag, we're not actually treating it as chametz. I mentioned before also, whenever the Ramah says, we're strict, but in these situations you can be lenient, what that really means is that me'ikar din, according to the law, we can be lenient, and our practice is to be strict. So whenever the Ramah is saying b'shas adchak, a chol and a zaken can eat it, meaning really according to strict law that means it's okay, or else he wouldn't allow it in those situations. But the practice is for everybody else to be strict and only to be lenient in those situations. So even though we have this concern of actual chametz, perhaps with matzah ashira, I don't think anybody's going to go to the extent that you can't own it, etc. What that means is similar to kitnius, except that you also cannot. That it just means you can't eat it on Pesach.
Well, in the theory, then the stores couldn't sell it.
Well, they can sell it. They can buy it.
Well, unless you say that the distinction between Sephardim and Ashkenazim was really to the extent that Sephardim think it's chametz, they think it's not chametz, and we think it is chametz.
Right. So
that's not the case.
That's okay.
That's not the case. Again, it's a bit more defined. Okay, we're running a bit short on time here. So source number 7, I just brought from the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan again lived at the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. So he is very upset because he, I guess, is witnessing many people around him eating matzah shira, and is goes a bit on a tirade against him. He says, how can you do that? You're going against our minhag, you're going against perhaps the opinion of Rashi, and the Yerushalmi's opinion that it might be a problem. Again, and what he concludes also is, I don't think this is really much of a chiddush, but he says again, but again, for a chola you can be lenient, and a zaken, he also includes a category which says mukulkale shinaim, somebody I guess who has weak teeth, and it's more difficult for them to eat matzah, and matzah shira is going to be softer, and they can eat it. So they too would be permitted to eat matzah ashira on Pesach.
sorry, on the first night Pesach, what is the option for a zaken or a chulek? Is it first of all for him not to eat matzah at all?
Is it better not to eat anything? I saw this. I didn't. Somebody mentioned that in Rav Felder's Sefer. He mentioned. I forget. I need to look at that again.
I know somebody that has colon disease, right, and cannot eat matzah, and they would eat it on the first night. He's and he'd end up always in the hospital.
Yeah.
But he insisted.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
yeah.
he would always eat it.
So you're saying, if you really can't eat it, is it preferable not to eat anything, or is it preferable to eat egg matzah? That's your question. I need to look at that, but I'll try to get back to you. Source number 8. In source number 8. Oh, I mixed up my numbers here. Source number 8, which is the Rambam, and then the non-number source Aruch HaShulchan. The Rambam, it's funny, the Rambam mentioned before that all types of mei peros cannot become chametz. And then here, but then when it comes to fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah, he says you only can't eat it with yain, shemen, and chalav, because those are matzah shira. But everything else, seemingly, even other types of fruit juice would be permitted, even for the Seder night. According to the Rambam, it seems like if you look in source number 8, where it's matzah shalasha b'mei peros yotza ba'yidei chavasa b'pesach, that if you knead together flour with fruit juice, you fulfill your obligation of matzah, even on the Seder night. But those are lechem oni, k'moshe biarnu. And for those, the question is, why is the Rambam saying? The Rambam saying, therefore, you can take water and apple juice and fulfill your mitzvah on the Seder night. The Aruch HaShulchan just goes in and says he's probably basing himself on the fact that the Gemara always mentioned yain, shemen, and dvash, and then doesn't really understand at all where he's coming from. And and as we saw before in the Shulchan Aruch, when it comes to codifying the halacha, all types of fruit juice you cannot fulfill. They can't become chametz, but they also can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah the first night. So he argues with the Rambam. When does matzah shira perhaps play? When is it most important for Ashkenazim?
When it's Shabbos is Erev.
Yeah. So I have a book here, Erev Pesach Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. What happens when Erev Pesach? A whole book on it, believe it or not. Not such a big book.
There's a lot going on that day.
Well, apparently also, because also what's included in this book is this: every year you have Erev Pesach Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. You have a situation of Purim Mishulash in Israel, which means that's when the 14th of Adar is on Friday, and the 15th is on Shabbos. So therefore, in Yerushalayim, they have like the 3-day Purim, and also that's always the same year where they have to do another mitzvah. So he includes those in here. Okay, but either way, it's Rav Rimon from Alon Shut. So the case where it comes up most prominently is always the situation of Erev Pesach Shechal Yos B'Shabbos, which does not happen again until 2021.
And then it happens like 4 or 5 times in the next 9 years.
It's very sporadic. Sometimes it can happen like 3 years apart from each other, and sometimes you wait 20 years in between. So last time it happened was 2008, and we're waiting until 2021. So it's about 13. We're dealing with a 13-year gap.
And then after that, it comes like
it could come in clusters. So anyways, so why is that the most? Because then we have the biggest issue now. So why is that the biggest issue? Because then you need to eat 2 meals. I mean, really, it's Shabbos. You really need to eat 3 meals. And how can you eat 3 meals? You can't eat chametz after what we'll call the 4th hour during the day. If you can't eat chametz after the 4th hour during the day, how are you supposed to eat shalosh shudas? Shalosh shudas is the biggest issue because you can't eat shalosh shudas till after mincha. So what are you supposed to eat? You can't eat chametz because you can't eat chametz. You can't eat matzah because we have a rule that you can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So you can't eat matzah and you can't eat chametz. So what do you eat? So that's really that's question number 1. Question number 2 is, even for the first 2 meals, what do you eat? You could have bread for the first 2 meals, the one at night during the day, but who wants to have bread in their house on their Pesach? What are you going to do with that bread? You can't burn it, start flushing it down the toilet, make sure you eat everything. It starts getting very confusing. So matzah shira is where people, where saving grace and comes to save the day, perhaps, for Erev Pesach Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. But just before we get there for a second, in source number 9 and 10, there's another question. Until when can we eat matzah shira? In general, forget this case of Erev Pesach Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. Until when can we eat matzah shira in general? So the Aruch HaShulchan says you can eat matzah shira all day, meaning
Like right up until...
well, we'll see exactly until what. I mean, certainly until the end of the day, you're not supposed to start a meal because that shouldn't have a big meal. But you can eat. The minhag is not to eat matzah. The minhag is not to eat matzah shira on Pesach itself. It's not to eat matzah. Not on erev Pesach. So Aruch HaShulchan implies that we can eat matzah shira, throughout the day, which would solve the every year crisis. So what do I eat now? Because again, you can't eat matzah, you can't eat chametz. The Rav Moshe Feinstein, which I think is the overwhelming majority of poskim agree with Rav Moshe, is that no, we're going to treat it the same way as chametz. You can eat chametz till the 4th hour, you can eat matzah shira to the 4th hour. After that time, you shouldn't be eating matzah ashira as well. Now, just to add in another point, I heard this not directly, but somebody told me the name of Rabbi Kropkin, that we mentioned 2 issues before. That the other issue on erev Pesach is you shouldn't eat matzah because you're not supposed to eat matzah because you want it to taste good, whatever, for that night. So there are those opinions who say even though matzah shira you can't eat for the night, it counts that you shouldn't eat matzah shira during the day because it counts enough as matzah that you'll lose your appetite for matzah that night, even though you can't fulfill the mitzvah with matzah shira. So the truth is, I think Rabbi Kropkin thinks you shouldn't eat matzah shira. Forget even to the 4th hour, you shouldn't eat it all day. Not for the concern of chametz, for the concern that it's like matzah, and therefore you wouldn't even eat matzah shira all day. Perhaps, and I think he would change his opinion on erev Pesach. Shechalios b'Shabbos, where you have all these other factors to play in. And so just to explain, so what's the case? Now let's just talk about the erev Pesach case. So again, you have erev Pesach, which falls out on Shabbos. You need to have you need to try to figure out to have these meals. So one suggestion is to have matzah shira. So if you have egg matzah, so again, we're not treating it as chametz, and therefore you don't have chametz in your house. So the question is, until when can you eat it? So I think everybody would say you can eat it for sure at the night, and then you can eat it the first meal during the day. The question is, can you eat it after, then you're on the question, well, can you eat it for shalosh shudas? Can you eat it for the 3rd meal? So the Shulchan Aruch says, yeah, of course you can eat the 3rd meal, because the Shulchan Aruch thinks it's not chametz. So therefore, since the Shulchan Aruch thinks it's not chametz, then obviously there's no problem eating it for the 3rd meal. The Ramah says, no, our minhag is, how do you have shalosh shudas on erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos? Eat meat, eat something else, which is the ideal way to fulfill the mitzvah, but at least you're eating something. Based on that, that's really where the Aruch HaShulchan in source number 9 here comes in and says, well, when the Ramah says that even though the Ramah says, oh, you should eat fruit, well, why? According to the Aruch HaShulchan, we said you can eat matzah ashira all day. So he concludes by saying that the Ramah said you should know why he said you should eat meat, because nobody's crazy enough to make matzah ashira, to make a whole production of matzah ashira just to eat in that one time slot. He's saying because nobody ever had matzah ashira, therefore the minhag was, therefore you wouldn't eat it, and therefore you're going to eat bread. Because who's going to go through the trouble just to make that for this one meal? You can't eat it on Pesach itself, so it's going to eat it on Pesach itself, so nobody's going to go through that trouble. But he says, let me conclude with this, but he says, but really, that doesn't mean you can't eat it. Therefore, if you would have it available, then you would be allowed to eat it even at later points during the day. Again, I think the custom is not like the Aruch HaShulchan, and it is that you wouldn't eat matzah shira any time you can't have chametz.
Don't most people have like 2 meals right away in the morning?
You can't. I mean,
But
you can only we assume you can only fulfill shalosh shudas after midday. So that wouldn't help. So just to conclude with matzah shira, seems to have really been an argument stemming all the way back to Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam had to understand the contradiction between these 2 Gemaras, where Rabbeinu Tam says it can never become chametz. Rashi says it can become chametz nuksha, which then became the approaches of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, which is generally the practice of Ashkenazim and Sephardim again today. Then the other issues in terms of what is considered lechem oni. So that's and that we said in terms of the first night, and we assume that anything besides water is matzah ashira, and you wouldn't be able to eat that the Seder night, even according to Sephardim. And then the last question was, until when you can eat matzah ashira? That's dealing with 2 issues: do we treat it like chametz or not? And even if you don't treat it like chametz, do we have the issue of it being like matzah, and then you run into the other problem not eating matzah on erev Pesach?